Hello there! In this video we will spawn a ball once the current one is out of bounds, and we're going to be using a factory component for that. The factory component is what we use in Defold to spawn game objects dynamically. It is rather simple, as we will see soon. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a game object to our main collection. Let's go then. We're going to call it ball factory. And then we'll add a factory component. So let's go ahead and add a factory. Position here doesn't matter, as we actually specify the position of the object when we're spawning it. As you can see, the factory needs a prototype for it to work. Prefab is another term that's used in other game engines. In practical terms for Defold though, it means that we have to create a game object in its own file, and then we reference it here. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's create a folder called prototypes. So, yeah. Inside the main folder, be mindful. And inside we'll create a new game object. Let's go ahead and call this ball. Okay, now we need to add the sprite in the script, same as we did in the main collection. So it would look and behave exactly like the ball game object we have there. So one simple thing and cool thing you can do with Defold is you can just copy and paste them basically. So let's just zoom out to make sure it's working. Yeah, there we go. Before we forget, let's go ahead and set the prototype in the ball factory. So it's factory, and there we go. At this point, we can get rid of the ball we have in the main collection, because we're going to be relying on the factory to spawn balls. Now all we have to do is actually spawn the balls, because we will need some coordination logic or main game logic, as we previously discussed. We're going to create a new script to control the game. Let's create it inside the main folder, not the scripts folder, because this is something personal, but I like to have the controller script next to the collection it's in charge of. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll call it main_controller. With the script in place, let's first create a game object for it. We'll just call it controller and attach the script to it before we forget and test and nothing happens. So let's go ahead and do that now. There we go. And before we implement the main controller's logic, in the ball movement script, we have a debug print statement, if you remember. So let's go ahead and remove it. And actually send the message to the main controller, notifying that the ball is out of bounds. So let's start by creating a constant for the message we're going to send. We'll just call it ball out of bounds, like this. It's going to be a hash of the same string, just lowercase. There we go. Now the way we send messages is with msg, for short for message, .post, that it needs a receiver. So for the receiver, this is a URL that we need to use. The URL is usually game object hashtag component. So in this case, it would be controller hashtag main_controller, right? The message ID, we know it's the one we said there. And the other way of looking at URLs, we've done this in the before, but let's do it again, no worries. You go to the component and then you can look at the URL. Now, if you notice there's a slash here, we don't really need that for now. If you want to learn more about messaging in Defold, we're going to leave a link in the description below. Okay, now let's implement the logic for the main controller. Let's get rid of all the functions except init and onMessage. So we're going to be using onMessage this time. And yeah, looks about right. We're going to be using the same message. So let's just bring that over, because in here we send it and in here we receive it. So we're going to have to check for it in a bit. So there's something we didn't do in the previous video, and it's the reason why randomness wasn't working. So if you tested, you probably notice it. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and fix that. Whenever we use random numbers, we need to set a seed. That's how we achieve pseudo randomness. So let's go ahead and do that in the init function first. and we're doing it in the main controller function because we only want to be doing this once per game. So we random seed, and then we get the OS clock. Sorry, it's OS time. There we go. There's one more thing. There's an issue with Lua. Now, I'm not a Lua expert. However, just by Googling in the default forums, there's a recommendation that you call math.random here. You can even call it multiple times. This is just to make sure that the next numbers we get are actually random. So there appears to be an issue in Lua where the first calls of math.random are not really random at all. So we just call it here. Okay? Because we need to specify the position of the ball when creating it via the factory, we're going to have to set the game's dimensions, right? So the width and the height. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've done that. We've got the width here. And we should have the height in the paddle script. So let's bring that over. Let's just copy it. And we've got the game dimensions there. Sorry, this goes on the init function, not on the end message. So let's make sure we place it in the right place. Okay, now let's go ahead and create the ball's initial position. So we're gonna be storing that in the self table. So let's ball initial pos. Oops. And we've already created vectors before. It would be the EX axis would be half the width of the game, right? So it's one in the middle. For the Y, it's gonna be pretty much the same thing, just using the height. And for this Z, we've been using 0.5, so that's what we're gonna be using. Okay. Now let's go ahead and create a helper function to spawn the ball. Now, because in Lua, functions need to be declared before you use them. So because we're gonna be using this function in the init and also on the onMessage functions, we need it at the top. So we create a local function. We're gonna call it spawn_ball. It's gonna need itself, right? Because that's where we have the position. Okay, and the way we create objects is through the factory.create function. And yeah, so we need the URL. So again, it would be game object, so ball_factory, #factory, or you can look it up. You don't need to remember this rule of game object #component. You can just go and check you can even copy and paste it from the collection and it's gonna work. Okay, and then self.initial position. Ball initial pos. Yeah. Okay, now let's make sure we're calling it in the init function here. So we actually start with a ball. And we need to do this because we got rid of the ball from the main collection, right? So, okay, let's go ahead and test this. We should get an initial ball. But there we go. So the last thing we need to do is to react to the out of bounds message that the ball is sending us. So we actually get to spawn another ball. So in the onMessage function, we just need to check the message ID. So if message ID is the constant we defined earlier, right, then all we need to do is call spawn ball. Let's go ahead and see if it works. And there we go. We see some randomness as well. Awesome. This is it for this video. Now we've got a ball working, a ball factory, which is really cool. We've got movement for both of the paddles. Awesome. So let's go ahead and make this game more interesting now. See you soon.